Welcome everyone. Today we'll explore 5 influential approaches to curriculum, that is Tyler, Taba, Swab, Walker, and Freire, and we'll anchor them in the realities of English education in Indonesia. My goal is not to make you pick the best model, but to help you see how each offers a lens for designing, debating, and improving curriculum. As we go, keep your context in mind, your school, your environment, your students, and ask yourself, which part of these models help me solve problems I actually face? Curriculum is never neutral. It encodes priorities, values, and power. What gets counted as knowledge? Whose English counts as standard? In Indonesia, the English curriculum sits at the intersection of national identity and global aspiration. Ministries emphasize competitiveness and assessment. Communities worry about culture and character, and teachers juggle paperwork, mixed proficiency, and limited time. Studying these theories gives us a vocabulary for those tensions. Rather than saying, this syllabus doesn't work, we can say, for example, well, this is overly Tylerian and ignores Schwab's call for deliberation. Or, you know what? We need fresh attention to inequity in our rural classes. To tell you the truth, theories don't live in books. They live in the choices we make about texts, about tasks, about languages, and also assessment. So the first guy that we are talking about is Ralph Tyler. Well, Tyler asked for deceptively simple questions. What purposes? Which learning experiences? How to organize them? And how to evaluate results? The strength here is alignment. In an English program, if your purpose is academic writing, you choose process writing tasks, sequence them from paragraph to research report, and assess them with clear rubrics. Indonesia has loved this clarity. Competency standards, can-do statements, and detailed lesson plans all reflect Tyler's logic. But there is a risk. When the objective becomes students use passive voice in science reports, we may reduce language to small targets and ignore identity, culture, and real communication. Still, when a course is drifting, Tyler's questions are a powerful reset. What exactly should graduates be able to do, and how we will know? Now let's, for example, think of curriculum 2013 and also the long era of national exams. All are related to measurable outcomes, standardized tasks, and alignment from syllabus to tests. That gave compatibility across provinces. But many teachers felt trapped by checklists and pacing guides. In a typical senior high school English class, teachers raced to finish competency standard rather than linger on rich texts or student voices. The lesson here is Tyler is bad. It's that his model needs balancing. For instance, keep explicit outcomes for reading and writing, but pair them with time for student-chosen texts or local themes. Tourism in Yogyakarta, fisheries in Sulawesi. So objectives serve context, not the way around. The second person is Hilda Taba, the grassroots movement. Taba flips the direction. Teachers are curriculum makers. Start inductively, that is to diagnose learners' needs, then build objectives, select and organize content, choose experiences, and evaluate. So this is the thinking process, inductive thinking. Now let's take a good example from the English class. Yeah. It might begin with a diagnostic. For example, students struggle with argumentation. And then you could design mini units on claims and evidence using local issues. Traffic policies, plastic bans, political turmoils, and so on and so forth, before setting broader course outcomes. Taba's power in Indonesia is obvious. Teachers understand the students and local cultures best. Her risk is also obvious. Without time, training, and support, grassroots can become random. So the question is, what structures like MKMP communities, collaborative planning time, and shared rubrics let Taba's teacher agency flourish? We see Taba's spirit in Curriculum Merdeka and Sekolah Penggerak. Schools are encouraged to adapt, integrate local wisdom, and develop projects. Examples abound: English lessons using folklore from Papua, product descriptions from local industry in Bandung, podcasting in Makassar about mangrove conservation. And constraints persist, such as administrative load, uneven access to resources, and the habit of waiting for the official module. Your leadership task is to protect teacher time for design circulate exemplars and build peer feedback cycles. So, grassroots doesn't mean each teacher alone. The next part is Joseph Schwab practical model. Schwab says curriculum is a practical art, not a theory to be applied. Decisions should emerge from deliberation among four common places. That means subject matter, learners, teachers, and the milieu. Notice the shift from follow the model to balance the voices. In an English department meeting, we will eventually see that subject specialists argue for literary rigor, and teachers flag mixed proficiency and credit classes. What about learners? Learners want relevant digital tasks. What about community? The community values character education and bilingual opportunities. Schwab's point is very clear. A good curriculum is negotiated. not merely aligned. It's alive to the school's ecology. Curriculum Merdeka Belajar invites this balancing act but doesn't guarantee it. Schools with strong collegial cultures use data and dialogue. For example, assessment kompetensi nasional results, student work samples, parent-teacher in coastal SMK, English may pivot toward maritime English, in a pesantren toward ethical discourse and global citizenship, and in Bali Tourism Hub toward hospitality, English, and intercultural pragmatics. The danger is what is called by cosmetic change. The change happens when we end up renaming units without changing tasks. A swap-informed process looks like this. Bring samples of student writing, map them against program goals, and co-design a new sequence. Pilot for one term and review together. The next step is to review Dr. Walker, the deliberative one. Walker describes how the curriculum actually gets made. We have the platform, and we will engage in deliberation, and eventually we are going to conduct the design process. First, you need to articulate your platform, which means beliefs about learners, language, and society. So, who our students are, what language is all about, and who our society is, that will become the foundation for the platform. Okay? And the second one is, let's deliberate. And in order to do this, we need to surface disagreements, weigh trade-offs, examine resources. We discuss, we listen to each other, and we open up our disagreements over here, over there, and calculate the pros and cons, the benefits and the limitations. And eventually we take a look more deeply about our resources. And the third one is design. In this level, we are going to choose tasks. What kinds of readings or listening or videos we are going to use. And we are going to develop tasks that will be involved in the learning activities. And we also discussed the assessments as well as timelines. Walker normalizes conflict. He is okay with the conflict. Or conflict is just natural. You cannot just avoid it, but let's embrace it. You know? So, for example, the literature professor and ELT methodologists disagree. If you love literary works, and then in contrast, you probably have some conflicts with those focusing on language skills, and that is common thing, you know. But the key issue is we are going to deliberate transparently. And in the context of Indonesia, where policies shift and stakeholders are diverse, Walker helps teams avoid hidden curriculum, which fights by making values and constraints explicit. So think of recent shift from curriculum 13 to Merdeka Belajar curriculum. These are different platforms, and the platforms collided. What is the collision about? Competency-based efficiency versus character education, and also related to school autonomy versus assessment reform. All complexities are there. When we apply Walker at the program level, our platform might assert English as a means of democratic participation and economic mobility. So this is very important to think about the curriculum as a program. Yeah, it's not in particular of the particular class, but it is the program level. So English is not only to prepare students to work, but to argue and to think about broader global citizenship, for example. So when they learn English, they are ready to work somewhere outside of Indonesia. They need to learn about rules, advocacy, legal consideration, and so on and so forth. So this is the participation in democracy and economic mobility. And in addition to that, we also engage in deliberation related to tensions. Sometimes we have limited devices. Sometimes we have the classes are too large. And sometimes we also have exam pressure. So the design of our learning must necessarily be able to adjust to diverse tensions. Okay? And we need to schedule also the review process involving other participants during the mid-semester and at end semester, and to adjust. And it is evident that deliberation isn't a one-off. It's not one short deal. It is cyclical by nature, and what you need to do is do it over and over and over again. Now we are approaching this big guy named Paulo Freire from Brazil. He has the idea related to critical pedagogy. First, Freire critiques the banking concept of education. The banking concept of education requires students to be just passive containers. In contrast with the banking concept of education, he proposes problem-posing education, in which dialogue that builds critical consciousness happens. So curriculum can be both. On the one hand, it may reproduce inequality, but in contrast, it also helps transform it. So for English curriculum, for example, the questions are very sharp. Whose English do we value? What stories do we center? Do our task invite students to speak back to power, or only to imitate? A Freirean English class might analyze job ads for discriminatory language, compare news frames from across outlets, or write letters to local officials about school issues in English and certainly Indonesian. Thus, we treat language not merely just for accuracy, but for agency. So, inequity is real. Urban schools with strong Wi-Fi and international exposure versus rural schools with limited resources. Students in Eastern Indonesia with fewer English hours, and learners with disabilities underserved. A FRAIR-aware curriculum designs these particular realities. Low-tech dialogue routines, for example, think, pair, share, and community interviews. Bilingual scaffolding to include families. Assessment that value voice over accent policy, and text from Indonesian authors writing in English alongside global writers. So instead of focusing from people outside of Indonesia, we also raise the importance of listening to the stories of our own folks. Yeah. Following FRAIR also means interrogating the gatekeeper role of English in campus admissions and asking how our courses can widen, not narrow pathways. So this is very critical in order for us to really encourage students to develop themselves. We need to equip them with critical thinking skills. And here is the summary, the comparison of 5 models. Here's the synthesis. Tyler gives alignment while Taba gives teacher agency. And Swab gives deliberation across the 4 common places. Meanwhile, Walker gives a realistic process for negotiation. FRAIR gives an ethical North Star, that is equity in voice. And none of these 5 models, right, is sufficient alone. In a graduate English program, a robust design might set Tyler-style outcomes for academic discourse, develop them through Taba-style teacher-built units, govern change through Swab-Walker deliberations, and keep FRAIR at the center so that tasks cultivate critical, culturally grounded participation. So let's surface the big tensions we actually face. First, alignment versus autonomy. How much freedom should schools have to shape English programs without losing comparability? Second, centralized standards versus local needs. What's the right ratio of national benchmarks to local content and languages? For those who happen to come from outside of Java, I believe you can feel the huge gap between the teaching and learning qualities in Java and your own background, right? And the third one, opportunity versus gatekeeping. How do we prevent English from becoming a filter that privileges already advantaged students? So the key issue of gatekeeping is very important, and we will discuss it elsewhere, right? Okay, fourth, teachers as technicians versus change agents. How do we build time, trust, and professional learning so teachers can genuinely design curriculum? Your action research and thesis projects can and should live in these questions. Another issue that not touched well enough in our conversation is the concept of teacher self-agency, something that we will save for the next part of it, for the next session. Now, to conclude then, curriculum is a living negotiation of values, and let's use Taylor to clarify ends, and Taba to empower design, and Swab to balance voices, Walker to structure decision making, as well as fair to keep justice in view. As you leave this session, sketch your platforms in one sentence. Identify one unit you will redesign this term. Choose a text set, a task, and an assessment you will adjust. Then commit to a review date with colleagues and students. Theory matters most when it changes what tomorrow's lesson feels like for you and for your learners. Thank you.